Dear friends, what a Sunday. I'm often, in the midst of this season, blown away by the fourth Sunday of Advent. It's a Sunday unto itself. It's full of music, full of children, full of crying babies. I saw one crawl out of here just a little while ago. It brings all of you back home again who are coming home into families. Children and young adults who've been away at school and in college are home and in families, and people are coming together again and also coming to church. It's so wonderful when the sanctuary is full, as it is on this Sunday morning. On this day, I find also that I'm more than usually grateful for the creativity, the generosity, and the artistry that is with us in this congregation. The children singing, the beautiful youth playing instruments, wonderful music. I'm framed this morning by music with Patty and Julie, and the gorgeous poem by Tess. In some ways, because I've been here since early this morning, I feel like I could just go home right now, floating on the clouds of what a beautiful day this is, this Sunday of joy. But there is more to come, and a few more words to share with you on this day. Years ago, when I was at Riverside Church in New York City, I had a wonderful colleague who would drop by my office on any day of the week for a chat. He would come in, and as he entered my office, he would greet me in this way: "Hail, old favorite one, the Lord is with you." And he would begin talking. I always felt a little better after his visit, charged with some grace and sense of possibility. It was as if he was specially blessing me to do the work of God in the world. It was as if he was telling me I was somebody special and extraordinary. It was a rude awakening to hear that my colleague made a practice of going up and down the halls of the church, sharing this greeting with every single person he visited. We all felt unique, extraordinary, and special until we figured out that that greeting was David's standard practice for everyone he met. But I think that might be the point of our story. Mary, in this story, "Hail, old favorite one," is not extraordinary. She's an ordinary person like each one of us. She's from a small town. Let's say Fresno, or Peoria, or Bloomington, Indiana. And her life has been moving along in a relatively normal, quiet way. She's not yet out of high school, but she's seeing a guy, and young girls in the congregation this morning, you don't have to do this, your parents might not approve, but she's seeing a guy who's a bit older than she, with her parents okay. She doesn't have big plans for her life, there's no career track in place, and there are no plans for college and a higher education. The future for Mary, while not being terribly exciting, is also not overplanned, it's open. It is in her ordinariness that Mary comes alive to us. Rather than being meek and mild, pure and ultra-holy, what I love about Mary is just the opposite. She strikes me as being somewhat fearless in the face of the angel and willing to be captivated in her life by a moment. When the angel comes to her and talks about everything that's going to happen to her, Mary seems to me to be more surprised than afraid. She says this: "Well, how can this be?" And then the angel tells her everything that will happen to her in her life. Rather than creating a bunch of options for her, the angel says, "This is what it's going to be like." The angel doesn't bother to ask whether it's a good idea or whether she's happy about it, or could she be interested in going a different way? Could he explain the concept a little more clearly to her? No. Gabriel lays out the big story. It's a huge story. And then he tells her, "Don't be afraid. This is going to be all right." She takes it all in. She takes everything in. And it seems to me she takes it in without any fear or trepidation at all. God's favored one would have a child out of wedlock, give birth in a stable, lead a hard life, and one day see her precious son, her child, break all the rules, be condemned to death, and she would have to watch him die. Her life would be both ordinary and extraordinary, filled with joys and sorrows, happiness and tragedies, success and defeats, ups and downs, just like ours. So I believe that her story tells us about God and what God is doing with us in the world, then, in those days, and now. The conversation between Gabriel and Mary is one that is heard every day, every single day around the world. It isn't a story that is told once for all time, but the story gets unwrapped for us thousands of times. Maybe the details are different, but the meaning of the story is always deeply the same. God is active and activating in our human existence. We are not out here in the wilderness of life on our own, scuttling through the paths and highways of our human story all by ourselves. Even in the most difficult situations of life, impossible as they may seem, God is present, sometimes filling us with hope and promise so that we may have the strength to go on, and other times alongside us or inside us, sharing in our grief and our suffering. How can this be? Mary's question is answered every day. It's answered in hospital waiting rooms. It's answered on the wet, cold streets of our town. It's answered in places like Ferguson and Staten Island and Cleveland and Havana. Here is the good news of this day and of this season. God is present. God is here in life with us. God is involved in our lives in mysterious and often troubling ways, just as God was involved in Mary's life, presenting her with impassable possibilities for hope. As this time of Advent comes into fullness and we begin to anticipate the promise of Christmas, we get to take a deep look into our lives once again, and we get to ask that question, what is God doing or about to do in us and with us that is unlikely, improbable, and full of hope? On this Sunday, what is our hope as a congregation, as a body of people? Can we name the grace we are open to in the midst of this season? How might Christ be birthed in an unlikely way in your life this year? How will Christ be born to bring hope to whole communities, to the exiled, the deported, the tortured, the silenced, the lost, the dispossessed? Will the extraordinary and grace-filled happen this year? Do we believe that it could? And what is our role in this story? What role do we play? Do we believe in the impossible possibilities with God? Paul Tillich's words come to me in the midst of this season. Suddenly, he says, suddenly, a new reality. Once again, a new reality I never thought that I would see. Something new breaking through a most unlikely birth, a most unlikely event in the midst of this season. I was in New York City this past week for 2 packed days, and I was at the offices of Church World Service when the news broke that President Obama had lifted the restrictions on Cuba. We have been working at CWS for the past many years to free the Cuban prisoners who are incarcerated in this country. There were 5, 2 were sent home a couple of years ago, but 3 remained with life sentences. And we were amazed early Wednesday morning to hear that they were flown back to Cuba, just as Alan Gross was flown out of Cuba to his home in the United States after 5 years in prison. Amazing. 50 years worth of hostility and no relations. And then, in a morning, it has changed. The captives have been set free, and the waters, those hostile waters, are now waters of life, and they can begin to flow between our two nations, held in captivity for 50 years. How can this be? The answer: with God, all things are possible. And this year, there are those who are in the congregation this morning who are angered and grieving and wonder how to go forward because of the injustice of our justice system and the continued grief and outrage over the deaths of Michael Brown and so many other young black men in our nation. Our hope on this Sunday was for the end to rampant racism in our nation and for a justice system which truly embraces and works towards justice for all of us, black and white, young and old, privileged and too often neglected. Justice for all, for everyone, nothing less. After asking how this could be, how can this be? We must vow to live toward the time when all things, even this, are possible. And for us, what about our congregation? What's on our minds as a congregation this year? Amid all our transitions and retirements, endings and beginnings, completions, and all those things and all those relationships and all those ways in which we may never feel complete or forgiven or healed. How might God's love come to us in this place, in this church, in the midst of challenge and change? How might we be surprised this year and in this season by new birth, new hope, new life? Will we move into the future with fresh grace and a sense of hopeful possibility? Several years ago, the British TV interviewer David Frost, do you remember him? Held a conversation with Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa, just as Tutu received the Nobel Peace Prize. Frost was discussing with Tutu the problems of the world and commented to the Archbishop that he had always seen Tutu as an optimist. The bishop replied with these beautiful words which for me describe the essence of Advent this time of year. No, David, you see, I've never been an optimist. I am a prisoner of hope, which is different. We become prisoners of hope when we believe that with all things, with God, everything, all our dreams are possible. Optimism longs for a good outcome and is often quite cheerful and happy. Hope holds out for a universe and a world where justice, love, and caring ultimately reign for the good of all God's people. Joy, that beautiful word at Christmas, that beautiful word today, joy. The joy of Christmas has very little to do with optimism and everything to do with hope. The joy of Christmas means that we believe in meaning, fulfillment, and holding out in our lives and in our community for hope. Let our hope be enfleshed in us this Christmas. Let our hope be the response to the question, how can this be? Let hope define our lives as faithful seekers of justice, compassion, and love. On this final Sunday of Advent, like Bishop Tutu and Mary, who said to the angel at the end of the story, "Here am I," and like so many others who have gone before us, let us vow to be prisoners of hope, those who believe in and through God, who know that all things are possible, even the most impossible find hope in God. Amen.